Hi, Jenny, you okay?
Hi, did that work? Let me see.
It it did work. I can see you great.
Awesome. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to the community. It's wonderful to have you on here. For those people who are living under a rock and might not know the amazing work that you do, are you okay to just give a brief introduction about yourself, why you have such a passion for mental health, and obviously all the work you do regarding mental health, and also your journey of anxiety, if that's okay?
Absolutely. So, hi everybody. My name's Jenny, and I live in beautiful Southern California, but I'm originally from Germany. And I did start my education and my mental health journey in Germany. I studied clinical psychology and psychotherapy and became a psychologist, which is absolutely lovely job that I started in Germany, but then continued in the United States, where I started to focus also on marriage and family therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, it's been a really great journey to just see how you can impact others, how you can impact the world, how you can see how clients really create a change for themselves, right? With the facilitation and your help. So that has been really awesome to just see what impact you can have on a client's life. So that's really lovely when you get into the realm of showing up for service, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. I've always been fascinated with the brain. I think it's so interesting to understand why we react a certain way. And I always love focusing on also seeing how attachment, anxiety plays into our upbringing and plays into how we react and interact in romantic relationships. I focus a lot also in my practice on relationships and dating, because I've seen a lot of clients have anxiety and play out old patterns in their dating,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's super interesting to see how we can also change and influence our reactions towards it. And my journey with anxiety, as I just touched it a little bit about attachment anxiety, really stemmed from that place of being curious of how do I react in romantic relationships, and seeing that I have relationships and anxiety sometimes that for me in the beginning played out more as being avoidance, right? So not letting myself be emotionally involved in a relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
um, going to that place of being vulnerable, being more afraid to be vulnerable. So it's really interesting to see how when we have reparative relationships as grown-ups, that can change actually our attachment style. So something that I had to learn with anxiety is that it is safe for me to feel all my emotions, that it is safe for me to show up as myself and feel anxious or feel nervous or feel insecure, and show my body that it is safe to be all parts of myself. And that has been a big part of my journey, to learn to feel my emotions, to validate my own experience, and most importantly, to set healthy boundaries with myself and others in order to not get into this place to constantly be triggered and repeat a toxic pattern over and over again.
So when you said that obviously you studied at university, was was that because of the that you wanted to learn more about psychology, or were you interested as a child, or was it childhood experiences that made you want to help other people?
It was absolutely childhood experiences for myself that I've experienced, where I got into a place of trying to understand myself. And I think nowadays mental health is such a way more healthy topic in schools and
Mm,
but back then, when I struggled with navigating the world as a child and as a teenager, and understanding what a healthy attachment is, it wasn't talked about as much. And it wasn't normal for me to learn, oh, this the way you are and the way you're showing up as yourself, you're 100% loved. And I've seen a lot of other people and a lot of children and teenagers also experience the same, that we often learn love on contingencies. We learn to be loved because we're performing, or we learn to be loved because we're quiet. Especially women, we learn to love because we're the good girl, right? And
mhm.
great job with being quiet and doing it nicely. Whereas we teach our bodies in that moment that so not expressing myself and just keeping calm means I receive love, I receive praise. So we have to, at a point, retrain our body that it is safe to be ourselves, that we don't always have to please others in order to receive love.
Yeah, and just going on to, so it definitely seems like you're more focused on the anxious attachment and, like you say, relationships and anxiety and everything like that. Do you delve into like panic disorders with clients and other areas such as OCD, intrusive thoughts, etc.?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And what's really interesting, especially when we focus on anxiety, just seeing what's the origin and how we combat it, especially when we talk about that, we work a lot on trying to integrate like a holistic approach of seeing the body and the mind and the spirit as a whole system, in terms of we can address certain things in talk therapy, but especially when we experience panic or anxiety, we want to learn how we can strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system response, right? That is responsible for the calming response, right? And a lot of people think that's not something you should practice when you're not experiencing anxiety or panic. But the more you learn how to have this as an automatic response when you're not in a fight, freeze response, the better and the stronger your system can respond to it when you're actually experiencing anxiety.
So just for the people who may not know, Jenny, they're unaware what the nervous system is, how it plays a role in anxiety. Can you just explain that, and also how important it is to understand what it is so you can start to tame the response?
Mm-hmm. So the parasympathetic nervous system response is basically the antagonist for the nervous system response, for the fight, flight, freeze response that is activated when we experience anxiety. And while this was very helpful many, many, many years ago when we were chased down by a tiger and we had to have this response and we needed cortisol and we needed those hormones that get us jacked up, nowadays this response also happens when we have a threat that is not life-threatening.
Mm-hmm.
What we experience, on the contrary, to have hormones released that relax us, is the parasympathetic nervous system response. That means we have certain hormones that are being produced in our body. We have more saliva, like that's a typical sign that your parasympathetic nervous system response is triggered. When you have saliva in your mouth, right? Dry mouth is the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because one of the techniques that animals do is something we love doing as well in sessions, is shaking it off, right? So even seeing, where do I experience anxiety, locating it in your body and learning how to shake it off, and like see how we can even on a level in our body feel it and shake it off and move through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And movement triggers the parasympathetic nervous response. We often have it, right? That's why we sometimes feel great. Certain happy hormones are released. Dopamine is released when we move, when we even have gentle exercise, stretching. So all those things are actually really, really helpful to kind of combat that nervous system response that we have.
What would your advice be to someone who says, I'm in the middle of a shopping mall, there's loads of people around me, and they feel uncomfortable to start trying to shake off the anxiety that they're feeling? What tips would you give them in that situation?
Awesome. So 2 things. So first of all, I think it's so important to have self-awareness about it, right? Just seeing what, not only that is happening, but what is coming up in my body, right? Like, what anxiety, where do I feel it? What's happening in my body?
Mm-hmm.
And the awareness of letting, and this is where CBT comes in, and, reaffirming yourself, it is safe to feel whatever emotion coming up in my body. Okay, breathe through it, right? So breathing is really, especially learn how to have a relaxation breathing technique where we exhale longer than we inhale, signalizes our body, I'm okay, I'm safe. So that was what would be the first one. If someone has the capacity to handle, okay, I'm self-aware, I can calm myself down and say, whatever is coming up in my body right now, it's safe for me to feel this. Breathe through it. if we're not in the place of being self-aware, because sometimes we're so in panic that we can't be like, okay, I can't breathe right now. Something that really helps is incorporating grounding techniques, right? The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, for example, that really helps, that we also should practice when we're not in distress, because let's say you are in the shopping mall and you experience distress. I want you to ground yourself. I want you to go back to, what are things that I can see right now? What are things that I can touch right now, right? So what are things that I can smell? What are things that I can taste? So really engaging your senses and getting back to the present moment is going to help to calm your body down.
No, that's wonderful. And regarding the person who's in that situation and they feel overwhelmed and they end up leaving the situation, what advice would you give to them? Because obviously we know that with panic disorder, for example, you can get into that avoidant behavior, which can really fuel the anxiety disorder and cause things like agoraphobia. Would you tell them to go straight back into it? Would you tell them that they need to seek help from a doctor or a psychologist? What advice would you give to them if they say, I just can't face that situation of going into a shopping mall because they think that it's dangerous? And I think what you just touched on about the acceptance of the feeling, there's this, the misconception with anxiety is, because it feels uncomfortable, it's almost like a natural response for us humans to think that uncomfort means danger. And it's finding that that's not the relationship at all, that uncomfort is just the emotional response, even though it feels uncomfortable, that it's not dangerous, right?
Yes. And especially, I think, so 2 things. First of all, it's so important, and this is one of the things I always go over with clients, is the human experience is not only rainbows and sunshine and, the vibes only. We experience negative emotions. That's part of being a human, right? It is really important because, again, that's when we stop judging it. I can accept. It's never working towards, I'm only going to be happy and I'm never going to be sad. It's working towards, I understand that being sad is part of the human experience. And when accept that those are emotions that I get to experience as a human, I can move through them quicker, right? Because emotions are energy in motion. They move through your body. You accept them, you validate them, you let them move through, then you can let go of them. But if you're in the place of arguing with it, I'm not supposed to feel sad. Why am I experiencing this? This is annoying, right? The moment you get into an argument with yourself about what your experience is supposed to be, the longer you hold on to it.
No, that's great. And just going back to that person who's starting to avoid the situation, what would your advice to them be? So they're starting to avoid going shopping because they're scared of the anxious response.
Yeah, so for that person, I would absolutely recommend seeing someone that can help gradually move towards exposure therapy, right? And that means you don't just have to go in the shopping mall and hold space for it. You start with little triggers. You try in the therapeutic process, you learn, what is a safe space I can always visit when I go there? What are small triggers for me? You get to know yourself better during that process. You get to learn, okay, maybe I don't go to a shopping mall that day, but I will watch a YouTube video of a mall, or maybe a movie that plays in a shopping mall or park. And you're in that place and you see what's happening in my body. Can I breathe through it? What's happening when I do practice? Maybe instead of going to a shopping mall when we introduce the trigger in person, maybe we can just go to a bigger grocery store, or gradually a Target, then a shopping mall. So really seeing seeking help for that will be something that will just absolutely improve your life quality. So my absolute recommendation would be find someone who could work with exposure therapy, and who works with understanding and creating a safe space for the person to get used to the trigger.
Yeah, wonderful advice, and I completely agree with you. However, if you look at the science behind exposure therapy and therapists, for some reason, and and they think that maybe it's an ethical reason. There's a lot of therapists who know that the correct treatment for a panic attack in a shopping mall is exposure therapy, gradual exposure, just that you mentioned. But some therapists are reluctant to actually do exposure therapy because they find it unethical on the client. Have you heard of that in your space, or is that something that you've heard of other therapists doing, or is it quite easy to find someone who's willing to guide you through that exposure?
There's definitely a discussion, is it ethical or not? I think what's really important to see here is the consent of the client.
Yeah.
If it's a child that's being dragged to therapy and saying, he's afraid of XYZ, you're going to get over this. I absolutely agree. This is something that a person that should not be introduced to exposure therapy. But if it's something who says, I'm afraid of this, but I know it's impacting my life quality, and I would love to learn how to handle this, and if they communicate wanting to have a therapist who really takes it easy, I think they should be able to find a therapist if they really are firm on communicating what they seek in someone who does gradual exposure with them.
That's wonderful. And I think it's great what you mentioned before. The exposure therapy doesn't just mean going straight back to the situation. It can mean what you mentioned, almost rehearsals on YouTube, watching other people doing it, and just even reading about it could be a type of exposure, couldn't it? Because often when you're in a deep anxiety disorder, you start to avoid even reading certain things in the fear that it might create a trigger for the anxiety. So there's lots of exposures that you can really get deep into without just going straight back into the shopping mall and feeling like you wouldn't be able to do it because it'd be too overwhelming. Jenny, there's lots of questions I can see building up from the lovely guests. Are we okay to just go through a few of them whilst we have you? Fantastic. I'll just pick them at random. So there's a few that you've already touched the answers on. So one of them was how to cope, calm down when you're in a situation you can't leave. So I think you mentioning grounding techniques, it would be fantastic for that situation. Would you say grounding was, so if you're on an aeroplane, for example, and you get anxious on an aeroplane, what techniques would you give someone in that situation where obviously they can't come off the aeroplane if it's in the air?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, because a lot of grounding techniques are like walking in grass, etc. But again, the like focusing on your senses is something you can do in a plane, right? You will see, get into the place of what can I see, what can I taste, what can I smell. For people that know that they get anxious on airplanes, I think it'd be awesome to have a fidget toy. I think it's great to prep for it when you know, okay, there's something that I would get anxious, and they have a fidget toy that they can use during that time. Something I personally love that is maybe not as conventional is recording myself a voice memo.
Nice.
But like I'll have something on my phone in my voice memos in the iPhone that you can record right now, and you can talk to yourself, say, hey, this is me. I know it might be stressful when there's turbulences, but I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to feel your arms. Again, this is something getting you back to your senses. And I want you to remember you're going to be just fine. So whatever that be along those lines, this is just what came to my mind. But you can record a voice memo, because it's not, you can't call someone on the plane, because otherwise it's having a go-to person you can call is a great way to get back to the moment. But
I think that's a really good idea as well, because it's almost trying to replace the inner critic, isn't it? Obviously, when we're in an anxious state, we have the inner critic that's telling us, well, maybe this time it's not anxiety, maybe that something bad's going to happen. And having that replacement with the voice note is almost like replacing that inner critic and turning the volume down. So I've never personally tried that. So I might try that on a plane, because, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of flying, but yeah, I think that sounds a really good technique to use. The next question Let's have a look. Sorry, I went to put it on and it just came off. So, how to cope with health anxiety. And I think they did another question as well, which was they said that they have a compulsion of checking the physical symptoms on Google, and then it comes up with the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, I think the worst thing to do is to Google.
Yeah.
Right? It can be, it's not good if we really get into the place of thinking Google knows everything, because be aware of the fact that everyone can literally publish something on Google without having expertise or knowledge. So keeping in mind, I think that internet is the wild, wild west in a way, is a good reminder to see, okay, maybe I'm experiencing something, I should have a doctor checked out, or something that helps me to, in a place of first then, to say, okay, if I first go to a doctor and I still don't feel comfortable, then I can go on the internet and see what's going on, right? But first I have to go to the doctor, and in 5% of the cases, it's probably resolved, or they've had the support of a professional and they feel calm. So, but what it does, it lets your brain know, okay, I can't do it. It means I can do it after I take the proper, take proper care of myself. And in regards of health anxiety, I know it can be challenging it also depends on what health anxiety, of being afraid of diseases that can develop or having a disease. But I think it's good to overall view your body as your resource and as your temple, and seeing that even over worrying about it can be negative, have a negative response, because the more we stress out, the more cortisol we produce, the more we stand in the way of a healthy body response and a daily functioning, right? So keeping in mind, and I think something that helps me a lot when I do even generally get anxiety or even health anxiety, write it out. If you have it before it lingers all day in your head and you're worried about whatever's coming up, put your phone on airplane mode for 5 minutes and write it out all. You want to after, or put it to the side, but give yourself the space to process what's going on.
Yeah, so would you say that high levels of anxiety that isn't treated, so someone's dealing with that on a daily basis, that over time that could have a negative impact on the overall health?
It can have a negative impact on the overall health, but I don't want someone to get into the place of saying that's going to stress me out even more.
Yeah.
I think what's going to help is understand that you can nurture your body, that you have, this is actually something we have partially control over, right? We don't have control over all in our health. Some things are genetic, some are not, but there's always healthy habits that you can introduce, and there's relaxation techniques that you can use. There are things that you can do for your health that will help you to relax.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And it's like you just mentioned, it's a fine line to walk on, isn't it, when you're speaking to an anxious community, because you don't want to say that anxiety is going to cause long-term health conditions, because anxiety is one of the most treatable conditions, which is fantastic. And I hear anxiety recovery stories literally every single day that I wake up and check my DMs. There's normally another person who's made massive steps on the recovery journey, which is inspiring and motivational, not just to myself, but to the whole community.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with clients that had such severe anxiety, they couldn't work, they couldn't date, daily functioning, and they're thriving now.
Yeah.
They have a job they love, they're in relationships that they're very happy in. So it's 100% possible to create a different outcome, even if you are currently experiencing anxiety.
Okay, I'll pick 2 more questions, Jenny. Let's have a look. So again, you did touch on this, but just specifically for this person, they said, do you know any ways to combat physiological responses like fast heart rate or even nausea? So nausea would be a good one to explore as well. Is there any tips that someone could put in place if they're feeling nausea, and also if it's impacting like putting them off their food, for example?
So for nausea, again, those are when we experience something we want to change the long term. In that moment, you have to distract yourself, because not if you don't want to result into necessarily being in the place of continuously being triggered to be nauseous. It's so important to get yourself in a different stimulus. That could even be, again, what we talked about earlier. Jump on the phone and ask your friend, and prep this with your friend when you're not feeling nauseous, for example. Prep this with your friend when everything's fine, saying, there's going to be times I give you a call, and then I want us to talk about, remember that last time we went on vacation and we went to the wrong hotel and we had to take 30 other cars to get there, and we laughed, right? So really getting into the place of distracting yourself in that moment to calm down your response, right? I think what can help greatly too is when they are in that place is mindful breathing with visualization. So if you feel that, see if you can get into a breathing pattern, again, where you inhale but have an exhale that is the double amount of the time that you inhale, because it signalizes your body, okay, we can calm down, we're not in danger, right? And just for the visualization part, and this is something that they touch a lot in EMDR or different strategies where they have bilateral stimulation of imagining you having in a place where you're safe. Like create a safe space in your brain that you can visit when you're experiencing distress. And again, I can't stress this enough. I want you to practice this when you're not experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
What is a place that I can visualize and get emotionally lift myself up to feel calm, right? For me, is that sitting in a gazebo where I see grass and I see animals and I feel the wind and I see flowers going left and right. So, that like immediately. So having something where you get to a place in your brain that relaxes you is going to help you in that moment.
And just to stress on the point where you just mentioned why it's important to almost incorporate that into your daily routine instead of trying to do that in the first point when you feel anxious. So can you just stress on why it's important to obviously make it a habit, really?
It is important to make it a habit because our brain is receptive to understanding or to learn a different response to stress and trauma. So the more you strengthen your parasympathetic nervous system response, the more you learn, the quicker you can access it when you experience distress. It's the same when we practice mindfulness, right? So studies have actually shown that practice mindfulness for 8 to 12 weeks, it can alter the structure of your amygdala in your brain, which is associated with the emotional regulation in the system. So if you practice mindfulness, which means like doing, instead of multitasking, monotasking, that strengthens this response as well, because you have a different access to your brain for your emotion regulation. The more you learn to be calm, the more you learn to do one thing at a time, to show your brain it's safe. It's safe for me to focus on one, safe for me to be calm and concentrate instead of I have to do that, and then get anxious and overwhelmed because of the place of not knowing how you can finish everything and having pressure.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's so important now, isn't it, mindfulness in the treatment of anxiety disorders, really. And yeah, it's just such a powerful tool. One that should be used daily, and even if you're not dealing with anxiety, because it's just great to ground yourself. And like you said, just the acceptance of feeling how you do in that situation and noticing that during the day there's so many different emotions that we feel, and we don't just take a minute to evaluate that emotion. Normally it's just it's either a physical response that'll take us to that position, but yeah, being so mindful about day-to-day life is a great thing to be doing, I think. One more question, Jenny, before we let you go. There's so many questions. So how, it's just gone off, but it was, how do you deal with tension in your body? So this person gets head tensions and tension in the shoulders due to general anxiety day to day. What tips would you give them that they can start to incorporate now to help them feel better?
So a few things. So first of all, if your tension is simply not leaving and you're in a place of you need to calm down and you need to be present on focusing on whatever you're doing, or you might be at work, something that really helps is water. That could be cold water. If you're at work, even going into the bathroom and splashing cold water in your face. Cold shower also works wonders to get back in the moment, get regulated, reduce the tension. Second of all, overall, I think what's really great to reduce tension is physical activity. Physical activity of stretching, of yoga, of anything that you can do mindfully while you move your body, see like where the tension is, right? And that goes into my third point too, like being mindful of where you feel the tension. Can you breathe into the tension and release? There's some awesome breathwork things. There's even so much breathwork too that you can access on YouTube or even on my channel, where you can learn to get into the breathing into where you feel the tension and talk yourself through releasing it. Right? And being mindful of where is the tension? Can I breathe into it? And lastly, also, seeing like if there's anything physically that's going on to check that out.
No, that's wonderful. And that moves nicely on to, firstly, thanking you for coming on and speaking and answering the questions. It's been awesome connecting. But where can people find you? What's your space on the internet, website, YouTube, Instagram? And is there anything you're working on at the moment? Or if somebody wants to do therapy with you, do you have spaces, all that sort of stuff?
So you can find me under @JennyMeinen on Instagram. And if you want to look up my webpage, it's www.jennymeinen.com, where you can find all info. There's also a blog for a few posts that interest you. And I currently am opening up some spaces mid-end May for one-on-one sessions, which is really exciting. And I'm also having a group program coming up. So that's going to be awesome too. And that group program focus on women that really are interested in leveling up their mental health, their relationship to themselves, and really dive deep into self-love. So that's going to be really exciting. And yeah, I just want to encourage you. I love helping others. I love serving. If you have any questions that haven't been answered, don't hesitate to just send me a message and I'll do my best to get back to some of your questions.
That's wonderful. And just regarding the therapy that you're opening, is that just for people in America or is that open worldwide?
I work worldwide. So wherever you are, send me a message, send me a request. And depending on where you are, we will see where we can fit you in. But yeah,
fantastic.
I'm excited. I'll always love working with new clients.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny, and enjoy the rest of your day in the sunshine. Very jealous.
Yeah, I'm so honored that you had me here. It was absolutely lovely. I hope we do this again one day.